I am once again delighted to be working with the folks at Assisting Hands to partner on a discussion like this. Steve and Patricia, you bring us the most amazing guests, and today is again just a great topic and two thought leaders in in the space of communicating with family members and aging topics. Um, Delighted to have you here and delighted to duck behind the curtains and let you all take over. But folks, the best part about these discussions is they're live and interactive. So as I duck behind the curtains, I want to remind you to type in your questions as they come to you, and we'll make sure that we address them throughout the day.
Steve, thanks for the introduction. Look, we have what I think is a really good talk today. A little bit of background on me. My name is Steve Lorberbaum. I'm the owner of Assisting Hands Home Care. For the last 10 years, we've been working all over Montgomery County and PG County to provide a little extra assistance to families in need, whether it be short-term or long-term. And we get to see a lot about the difficult conversations that precede the needing of care. But I've got two experts. I want to introduce Jenn Gruber and Jillian Bernstein. And basically, we're going to come at this topic from a couple of different ways. It's going to talk more from the family dynamic, and Jillian's going to talk a little bit more from the HR side. So for those of you that are working and you're trying to navigate your parents' problems, but still in a full-time job, what kind of resources might be available there, and how to have that conversation with perhaps your boss on how you need a little extra time. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. Jenn, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And thanks, Steve Gurney, too. Thank you both for having me. It's great to see such a big crowd on today's call. I'm Jenn Gruber. I am a life coach. My specialty area is family transitions. So I work with people who are going through any big changes in their lives, and I really help them to set themselves up for smoother transitions so that they can find more joy in this next chapter of their life. Could be adult children who are overwhelmed by the changes their parents are going through and the increased support that they need. I also work directly with older adults who are maybe considering a move from a long time home into a next chapter home. Yeah, that's a little background on me.
Okay, Jillian, why don't you share with us a little of your background?
Thanks, Steve, and thank you, Steve Gurney, also for having me today. It's an honor to be here. I am Jillian Bernstein. I am founder of the Wellness Extension, which is an HR partner to small businesses. So I basically provide fractional people support to make sure employees are truly engaged and receiving the best benefits they can at work, and they feel connected in their work community. So one of my goals is always to make sure work is where we spend a majority of our time. We bring sometimes our life stuff to work. So my job is to be that human connector and make sure employers are really demonstrating through the benefits and programs they provide that care for their employees. So I love doing that on a day in, day out basis, and I look forward to helping answer any questions you might have.
Great. So before we get started, I also want to recognize and thank Patricia DeBroof, who is our Director of Community Relations. She helped organize this, and she has brought both Jenn and Jillian here today. You can curse her later or applaud her efforts. You'll decide. Again, thank you. Patricia's monitoring the chat, so if there's any questions people have, feel free to put them in there. So let's get started and set the table a little bit. This is a big topic, right? It affects lots of people. It's all about parents who are aging or couples who are aging, and either a spouse needs to have that conversation or the adult children need to have the conversation about maybe some parents' diminished capacities. Maybe it's an inability to drive, or it's making bad decisions or inappropriate financial decisions. So I want to get started and just say, look, there's lots of issues. There's no right or wrong answer. The goal here is how to have these conversations without making them adversarial. How to keep the voices calm and the conversation going. I don't think any of us have a magic bullet on how you're going to absolutely convince somebody to give up their car today. I just want to set that as an expectation. We've got some ideas, but that's it. So, Jenn, look, tell us a little bit about the work you do when people come and say, you know what, my mom just won't listen to me. I'm super reasonable. I just don't understand what's going on with her. How do I get her to stop driving?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. I think you said a couple key things there. One is like, how do I get her to stop driving? So the way you're phrasing that question, you're presenting it as, I want one thing and my mom wants another thing. How do I get her over to my side? So there's a conflict right there in the middle. You've got two people and something coming between them. And what I love to do is help people approach things a little bit differently. Instead of seeing yourselves as adversaries, you and your mom are on the same team. You want what's best for your mom. Your mom presumably wants what's best for herself. We need to reframe the conversation so that instead of how do I convince my mom not to drive anymore, it's how do I establish a level of trust with my mom so that she sees that we both have the same goal in mind. We both have the same goal of helping her to have a safe and happy and fulfilled life. And so really that's the first step, is building that trust so that both people feel like they're on the same team, rather than your mom feeling because if someone's trying to convince you of something, our natural reaction is, okay, no, I need to protect myself. And we want mom to feel not like she needs to protect herself, but like she wants to work with us. So that would be the first step.
Gotcha. And one of the things I would say, and then Jillian, I'd love your thoughts, is what you're talking about here really is parenting upstream, right? And no one wants to be parented upstream, right? You don't want your kids telling you what to do.
Sure.
Likewise, no parent, they taught us how to use spoons. So they don't really want us telling them that they can't do something. To your point, it's a way of framing it. And Jillian, I don't know if you have any added thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's just important to approach these conversations with a sense of empathy. If you were in in their shoes and put yourself in that position, how would you want to be addressing and to be addressed in that type of conversation? Because it's an emotional one to have. And I think empathy can go a long way and say, look, I know this isn't easy, and recognize that out at the start of this, like we have to have, and I would name it, a difficult conversation, because I'm worried about da da da. I know it might not be a worry for you, but we need to figure out some common grounds here so we can both be comfortable. And I think if you frame it that it's difficult and that like this is uncomfortable, then that's a good way of starting the conversation and just showing empathy around it.
Okay, one of the things that I like to say to people is, if you can get somebody else to do your dirty work, you should. So for example, doctors, they're the ones that should be telling someone they're no longer capable of driving. You're the support that says, hey, Dr. So-and-so said, let's figure out how we deal with that together. What else are we going to do to give you options, right? It's when you become the bad guy, you're the bad guy. You're telling a person who's been driving for 60 years that they don't have freedom of the road and independence. And that's critical in America, right? It's what we all want. It's what we strive for when we're 15 and 16 to get our driver's license. And now it's being taken away. And so getting someone else to do the dirty work so that you're the support player, then you're saying, gosh, mom, that doesn't feel right. I hear you, but we have to respect his opinion. He is the doctor after all. I think that helps. Jenn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that what you said just goes right along with what I said. When the doctor is the bad guy, then that's helping to establish that, mom, I know it must be really hard to hear that from the doctor. And you don't have to say anything else. It must be really hard. That shows that you're listening. It shows you're acknowledging what she's feeling. You're validating that. It helps to establish that trust that I was talking about. It helps to establish that you're on the same team.
Gotcha. Okay, so I see a couple of questions in the chat, and there's a blended question, so I'm gonna try to ask it together. So this is really dealing with someone who doesn't have a physical impairment, but they have a cognitive impairment. And so how do you get that person with a cognitive impairment to do something that you may want them to do because you believe what they're doing isn't safe? Whether it's, as one of the person said, stepping down from a job to stepping away from a car. Again, one of the things I'll just start is saying you can't argue with a person with diminished capacity because they lose that part of their brain. When you come at someone and say they shouldn't do something, their first response is to say no, because that's what you're always taught when you're young. If somebody says something, you say no. If it feels unsafe, I should step away from my job. No, why would I do that? I love my job and I need to make money. I should step away from my car. No, I need to drive. So again, you're not going to win an argument with a person with a cognitive impairment. You have to use other approaches. So Jenn, what do you got? Anything? What magic wand do you have here?
Oh gosh, with cognitive impairments, it's just so tricky. And there's such a wide range. That would be the first thing I would say is there's no one answer. In any situation, there's no one answer that's going to apply to everyone. But especially with cognitive impairments, there's just so much variation in situations and maybe the degree of the impairment. My dad had Alzheimer's and passed away almost 10 years ago. Really, what drew me to this kind of specialization area in my practice, I realized I was with the adult child who was putting out fires as they arose and dealing with crisis after crisis, but didn't start out with a really well thought out plan. And I learned so much through the process that's a big part of why I love helping other people in this way now. So, someone with cognitive impairment, I think that, like you said, Steve, you can't argue with someone who's cognitively impaired. It's also, you need to be strategic about really what your goal is in the conversation. What is it that I'm hoping to accomplish by the end of this conversation today? If it's, I want to convince my mom that she needs to move out of her house and into memory care, that's probably not going to happen in one conversation. If it might be planting the seeds, it might be trying to get a better understanding of what her level of cognition is or where she's coming from. So first, being really clear on what your goal in the conversation is important. And then really, I like to let the other person take the lead. And in these conversations can be really helpful if you're doing more listening than talking. And so what was a specific example, Steve?
There were two examples or two questions, a bunch now. One was after a car accident. How do you have that conversation? Someone who already lost their driver's license with the DMV, but doesn't accept that fact. And the third one was, how do I recommend to a friend that perhaps they should step down from a leadership role at a company that they're invested in because they're no longer capable of managing that job role?
Yeah, okay. So for the driving ones, especially when there's been an accident, when there's memory decline, I think either involving a doctor, or that's a great example of a place where a white lie could be really useful, saying the insurance is expired and your insurance company isn't going to renew because of your age, because you've had an accident, the car, something along those lines that's going to be blaming an outside source for the decision. Something like that could be helpful. The friend who is working and who you feel maybe can't handle the responsibilities of the job anymore, starting a conversation by just talking about, wow, you really are working, you've really done great things with your nonprofit, and just seeing where the conversation goes and looking for any kind of introduction. Yeah, I'm the long hours are harder for me than they used to be, or it gets frustrating when technology keeps changing, whatever that introduction is, then you can look for that as an opportunity to maybe steer the conversation towards. Have you ever thought about taking a step back? And one of the things that you've done so well is trained other people and taught your employees about
Right.
what you do, and you've been such a great mentor. Looking for opportunities like that to take the conversation to the next step, which may be an
Jillian, you got
assisted
anything
conversation.
to share on that since HR is your world?
Yeah, I think so. It's a hard thing when someone wants to walk away or needs to walk away from something they've been working at for a long period of time. I agree with Jen that giving them kudos for what they have done and aren't you ready to, or asking them like, what their future plans are, what they want to do, and make it a little bit exciting. Wouldn't it be great if we could travel during the work week together and also have that idea plant, like Jen said, the seed. It's like, oh, it might be nice if I can step away a day a week. And then maybe what would retiring from my job actually look like? How can I engage? Look, I think when people go through life events or they have medical diagnoses, sometimes routine is what they need to feel like in control. And I think that is sometimes a challenge, especially if it's going to impact a business. And at that point, I would actually work with other leadership members of the team or try and connect with colleagues of theirs to start to have that discussion. Succession planning is super important. You don't want that nonprofit to go out of business. So those are things that I might, what is the succession plan we're thinking about? I know they did this before I retired. What is that? Those types of conversations and casually bringing them up. So it's not, I think you need to leave. That'll just put a defense mechanism up. But I think if you can talk about things, and also if you're close enough to the colleagues of that individual, or if that individual has other close friends and family who maybe can also jump on that train to encourage them to maybe take a few steps back, that would be the way in which I would start to plant the seeds and make retirement look great on the other side.
I will share a couple of stories from the world of home care for things that families have done as it relates to cars. I'm not going to say they're all good ideas. They are just things that people have done. For me, my father-in-law lost his driver's license. He continued to drive, and his wife continued to send him out driving. And when we asked her about it, she said, he doesn't remember he can't drive, and we need groceries, and I don't drive. So that wasn't helpful. What we ended up doing, because they lived in a small town in Georgia, we called the sheriff and said, hey, can you stop by, do us a favor? You go in and tell him he can't drive, and we're going to go put a club on the car. You don't have to say that you're doing it, but it's just going to be on there. And the guy came over. Maybe it's not something that can be done in Montgomery County, but the sheriff came over. He said, Hank, you shouldn't be driving anymore. Your driver's license is revoked. To ensure that happens, we're going to put a club on your car. And my sister-in-law went out and clubbed it. He never asked again because a person in authority told him he couldn't do it. It wasn't his daughter. It wasn't his wife. It was a police officer, and he was a law-abiding citizen. Some other things that people have done. They've opened up the hood, and they don't know what wires they pulled out, but they pulled out a bunch of wires. Car just wouldn't start. We've had clients misplace keys so that the keys go missing in the house. We excessively had somebody dump sugar in the gas tank. Now, that is one sure way to stop a car. Not exactly a smart way, but again, those are things that families have done. Look, I saw in the chat, one of our clients removed the car from dad, and dad, who had dementia, he just called up the dealer who he'd been buying cars from for 20 years and said, hey, can you bring me a new car? I misplaced mine. And they brought him a new car, and they had him sign the paperwork like sitting there in the house, and gave him the keys. This is a guy with dementia, and the daughter didn't have a power of attorney, and this company did this. Whether or not they could have stopped it or not, I don't know. But again, for everything you come up with, people are smart enough oftentimes to figure out a way around it. but there are lots of options to have that conversation or to take action. Again, one of the things that Jen said is, I call it therapeutic fibbing. So sometimes you got to make stuff up to create a successful and helpful situation for your loved one. So let's move off the cars a little bit and let's move on to the next hot topic that comes up, where loved one, son, daughter, or spouse thinks that this person should no longer live at home. They live in a small colonial where there are stairs, they live alone, and they think somebody needs to move to an assisted living or other type of community. And that's always a fraught conversation. Jen, got something for us?
Yeah. I would say you want to first, again, be really clear with yourself on what your goal is in having this conversation. Are you planting seeds today? Are you looking for buy-in? Are you feeling them out to see where they are on this? What's your goal in this conversation? And then you want to, as Jill said earlier, be careful to choose a time and place that are conducive to having the conversation. A lot of people want to have these conversations around the holidays because the family's all together and then we can get mom and dad and all the siblings sitting down together. I think there's a lot of merit to having conversations in person rather than over Zoom or over the phone. Holidays can be stressful when you get a lot of people together. Somebody's in charge of cooking, that person has a lot going on. And also, everyone wants to enjoy their time together, wants to just be together as a family. And so introducing this kind of stressful topic, it's not always really well received. So choosing a time and place where people are likely to be more receptive is always helpful. And then I always suggest approaching the topic through a lens of curiosity. Let go of any assumptions that you have. I know this is going to be a tough conversation because mom and dad have always said they're not leaving this house. If I'm going in with that assumption, then that's my own agenda. I want to change their minds. If I'm instead going in, okay, we're going to have this conversation and we'll see how it goes. And I'm starting it by asking questions. There's a new assisted living community, independent living community being built down the street. Have you guys noticed that? Do you know anybody who's moved there? Or my friend Tracy's mom just downsized. She's so happy. Have you guys ever thought about that? It's just things that if you can find a way to gently introduce the topic in a way that feels non-threatening. What you don't want to do is put your parents on the defensive. So if you're introducing it in a way that makes them automatically put up walls and feel like, okay, the kids are trying to convince me to do something that I don't want to do, that's what you want to try to avoid.
Gotcha. Jillian, anything?
I think on this one, I will just echo Jen's sentiment. For me, I think look, my father-in-law has a cognitive impairment and he is in independent living, and we're having the conversation right now because he has continued care, whether he should move to assisted living due to some of the basic functions that he can't do anymore. But we also think potentially he could go downhill quicker in assisted living. So the compromise is that he's in Dallas. He has an aide come to his place every day to help with those activities. And I think whenever you're having this conversation, as I've watched my husband have this multiple times, it has to be approached in a really gentle manner and over time. Even this conversation we continue to have about assisted living and moving potentially there, like it's brought up maybe once a week or once every other week or when there's an issue. We don't make it a big deal, but we make it something that isn't going to be like all of a sudden we're bringing this up. So I think the more you generate and have safe conversations around the topic, so that way when there is an incident and that's like the last straw or because of safety, then it becomes an easier conversation. Do you think now is the time? And especially if like, as I mentioned, he has a cognitive impairment, but it's not full-on dementia. It's just there are some cognitive issues. We want him to be a part of that conversation and respect him in that way too. So that's just a personal anecdote.
And I would say, look, I do private duty home care. So we take people through end of life in their own homes if they don't want to move, but they have to be able to afford it. So one of the things that I often say to people, if you're going to have the conversation, make it about options and choices, right? Explain it, again, if someone's got a cognitive impairment, harder to do. But if someone doesn't, and there are or a mild cognitive, just the start, then you can talk about the options of staying at home and what does that look like? Because a lot of people don't want a stranger in their home. And so if they don't want a stranger in their home, then there has to be some other option that they might consider. Some people are happy to have a stranger in the home for X number of hours a day, maybe not every day. Again, so you have to explore the options and look, there are so many different assisted living and independent living communities out there today that engage your parents in the search process, right? Because I know you can walk into some of these and I look and go, there's a bar in there, they've got music playing, they've got a 5-star chef, and I'm thinking, I'm ready to move in. I'm all in. But my dad ate chicken. Like, that's all he ate. He didn't drink. He ate chicken. My mom ate chicken. And they didn't need fancy. They didn't want fancy. They wanted a house that looked like their house. Older, more specific, comfort, not sleek lines and modern that look like the lobby of a Ritz-Carlton. So again, some of it's finding the right place for them so they can see what's available and what options are out there. Bring them to somewhere where there's 140 activities to do every day. And these are two people that are introverts and don't leave the house and are very happy reading books. That's not a sell point for them. So you got to know the audience, understand them, and then learn about the communities and include them in the decision and recognize that maybe it's a path. Maybe they start with a level of care at home with an expectation that because of cost or other factors, they may have to move. And you build a trajectory to head them in the direction that they may ultimately need to be.
Yeah. I think, Steve, what you just said is great. Like presenting options is so helpful. And before that, before even coming up with your options, really asking a lot of questions is so important. I think so many of us are used to being in situations where we're solving problems quickly. We're thinking quickly. We're like, okay, mom doesn't want to leave this neighborhood. We'll find something here in the neighborhood. Mom doesn't want someone else in the house. We'll find another option. We're quick to jump to solutions and we want to find the one that's the right sell. But sometimes we need to back up. And all of these conversations really, really should include more listening than talking, more of us asking questions than us offering options or offering solutions or telling or explaining. Really, when of course it's going to be hard to think about leaving the house that you've been in for 50 years and that you're comfortable in, where you're a part of a community that you've grown really accustomed to. You know, of course, Mom, when you think about moving, what is it that you're worried about missing the most? What is it that what is it that bothers you about the idea of someone else coming in the house? Once you can pinpoint what that is, I'll really miss being able to look out my kitchen window at the birds in the backyard. Okay, it's important that she's somewhere where there's bird feeders or some kind of connection to nature. I'll miss being able to go out to lunch with my friends every week. Okay, so we know that being somewhere where there's an active social network is really important, and maybe accessibility to those same friends that she's used to having this routine with. So really asking enough questions to know where that resistance is coming from is a precursor to coming up with those options.
So to loop Jillian, one of the things Jen said was people oftentimes are moving fast. Oftentimes the reason they're moving fast is because they work a full-time job and they've got kids. So Jillian, kind of any thoughts on how do you navigate the fact that you have this very full family life, you have a full and demanding work job? How do you find the balance? How do you find the time? What can you ask your employer to do to give you some time to slowly and thoughtfully address this complex issue?
So it's a great question. And I think, as I mentioned in my intro, we bring our life to work. And this morning, like I had something with my son and I was very honest. I'm like, I'm sorry I'm late. I have that. Same thing can happen when you have an elder parent who you're trying to juggle while juggling work. So I hope everybody's HR departments, there is the human word in human resources for a reason. I hope they're approachable, but things that you could ask for are benefits like an employee assistance program. That program, an EAP, often gives you not only the ability to call anonymously for counseling support if you need guidance, but it also has elder care resources. So that is generally across any organization I've worked with, completely free to employees. So that would be a great resource for you to start with, that EAP, and you getting resources. Needing time off or to flex your hours. Maybe you need to run your parent to a physician's appointment, or there was an emergency and you have to go to their home. I would have it, just try and have an open dialogue with your manager. Hey, I wanted to loop you in. This is something going on. I know we don't share a ton of personal stuff, but I wanted to know if I could please flex my hours. I plan to come in extra early or stay a little later so I can deal with this physician appointment, or if something comes up on the fly, then you've now set the bar for what's going on in your life. And hopefully that is well received by your manager. If not, I would go to HR. Dementia, cognitive issues, serious medical health conditions, those caring for somebody that is experiencing a serious medical health condition, as long as you've worked a certain number of hours at that job, generally it's a year, qualifies for family medical leave. That is job protected leave. It's not paid leave, but essentially if you needed, for instance, I had an employee who needed to take time off to figure out care for her parents and was juggling. So we put her on what's called intermittent FMLA, and she took a reduced work schedule, and we had her whole calendar as to when she was working, but then we also knew when she was caring for her parents. So you can work with your HR department and FMLA is a 12-week job protected leave. So that is something I would encourage you to ask your employer about. And if you live within a certain radius of the office, and if you have been at that employer for generally it's a year, if you're a full-time employee, you should be eligible for it, assuming it's a serious medical condition that you're helping someone, a parent in this instance, with. So those are just a few examples. And of course, I'd be happy if people had specific questions, they can of course contact me about their particular benefits.
So I want to shift the topic a little bit to something I saw years ago and see if Jen, you've got any suggestions, Jillian as well. So I was doing an assessment with a family, and there was the mom who had dementia, and then the busy executive son, and then turned out a social worker daughter. We're sitting in the room and the son says, "Mom, you have dementia." And she goes, "No, I don't." And he said, "You do." And she said, "No, you're wrong. I don't." "What'd you eat for lunch today?" I'm thinking, I don't know what I ate for lunch today. So he kept trying to prove to his mom that she had dementia, that she wasn't capable of understanding. The social worker daughter was trying to get him to stop, but he was getting more and more agitated because he was trying to prove his point to his mother that she has dementia. So therefore she needed either assisting hands or she needed to move, none of which she wanted. Meanwhile, she had been living safely in her home, and that was her point. And her argument was, I don't have dementia. I've been living fine here in the house. How do we get this conversation going? Because you can't try to convince a person with dementia that they have dementia. So how do you get them to see where the conversation needs to go without trying to bludgeon somebody to death, because it's not going to work.
How do we get the mom to I feel like in this case, the son is the one who needs the counseling on how
How do
to
you get the son to back off and get the mom to see a little more reason? But it's both need help here.
Yeah, yeah. So in a conversation like that, and it sounds like the social worker daughter probably was the one who could see everything clearly, I would imagine. She could see, I'm guessing, but you and the daughter probably could see that the son's approach wasn't helping and that the mom wasn't going to back down in this conversation. So I think in that case, if I were in the room, I think my first goal would have been to get the son to back off and to redirect the conversation. Like, okay, let's set aside, mom clearly doesn't want to hear or admit that she has dementia. So we're going to take that off the table. We're not going to talk about mom has dementia or doesn't have dementia. We're going to talk about, okay, what does your day-to-day routine look like? Where might it be nice to have some extra help? Or we're going to ask mom some questions that are going to allow her to feel like she's a part of the conversation and that she's being respected and honored. We want to make sure, and the son too, we want to make sure he feels respected. We want everyone in the conversation to feel heard and valued is really the key.
Gotcha. Jillian, anything you want to add?
I actually would also make sure that I probably would stop the conversation and revisit it with a physician present or someone that can, again, is a trusted person of the individual who has dementia in this example. And I would also try and have a conversation with the son offline saying, hey, you shouldn't also be agitating your mother. That doesn't help the situation. We're not going to get anywhere. So I think the National Institute on Aging has some amazing resources on how to have conversations with individuals struggling with cognitive issues from a caregiver perspective. And I think that if we, again, come at it and reframe, as Jenn had talked about at the beginning, with a sense of compassion, like you're almost fighting a losing battle. She's just going to continue saying, I don't have dementia. Once you recognize that, then you can maybe pivot the conversation to something else. That's the case. But what do we need? What do we need the outcome to be? And I think that is a huge reframe for caregivers, because you ultimately just want to best support your loved ones.
And what I tried to do, and I wholly failed, was it's really not about the diagnosis. It's about the symptoms, right? It's what's going on in her life that has now become a challenge or a problem. You don't need to put a label on it. It doesn't really matter. People are never going to feel comfortable saying, yes, I have dementia. Maybe there are some people. But, and even if she can't remember what she had for lunch, that's not important. It's what larger scale behaviors was he concerned about that maybe mom would see, oh, I haven't showered in a month. You're right. That is true. Right. So it's not about, to me, the diagnosis. It's about what's going on in her life that could be improved by either a change in living condition, moving, or by getting help. Thank you for that. There are a couple of things about what happens when the kids are in denial about a parent's incapacity. And Jenn, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to see what you got here.
Yeah, I noticed those questions in the chat, so I'm glad you brought that up. There was one a while back about someone said that she and her husband are preparing and want their kids to be involved eventually in paying their bills, helping to take care of things. But the kids, if I read it correctly, are resistant to having that conversation, don't want to talk about their parents not being able to do things anymore. And I think that that's natural. We as humans are resistant to change. And when we're talking about the people we love, it's hard to think of them not being able to do the things that they've always been capable of doing. It does represent a lot. It represents a loss for our parents, certainly, but also a loss for us. We're losing the parents who have been able to take care of us, who've been able to take care of themselves. So it's natural that there is sometimes some reluctance or resistance to wanting to face that or talk about it. I think from the parents' perspective, uh, I love when people think about these things ahead of time before it becomes a need. Most people are not that proactive. Most people's plan really is to do nothing and hope for the best. And then once they hit a crisis, that's when things start to really unravel. So I think it's always a real gift that parents are giving their children when they're able to have these conversations, when they initiate the conversations early on. That's not the case with a lot of families. And I wish that all of these adult children were grateful for that and recognized the gift that is. I think as far as having the conversations, introducing it by saying, look, I know that this is like not a fun thing to talk about, but we've been talking about the future. We would love for you to be involved in the conversations. We have a lot of friends whose kids have really been caught off guard when their parents have needed more help, and we don't want that to be the case for you. We want this to be as easy for you, this kind of transition to our next chapter. We want it to be as easy for you as we can. So we want you to be involved in the process. And I think then asking them, not telling them like, okay, we're going to need you to pay our bills for us, but saying we're anticipating that there'll be a time that we won't be able to pay our bills any longer. And how would you feel about helping us with that? Or we would love to turn that over to a family member at some point, if that's possible. Would you be willing to take that on? So you're presenting it to the kids as an option and not something that you're telling them, okay, this is what we're going to need from you. So you're going to have to step up and do this. You're presenting it to them like you want them to be involved. You want them to be a part of the decision. And they also do have a choice there.
Okay. Jillian, I know you have to jump off a little bit early. Do you have any last thoughts? Because I've seen a couple of questions I want to answer, but I don't want to give you a final say here.
Yeah, I think it's so important. My last thing is I just think it's so important to have the candid, kind conversations with your parents before things might start to decline. And I think it's a challenge because it's an uncomfortable topic to bring up. And I was just thinking about that today. There's a woman I know who helps you essentially prepare to die. And you put all of this information together and have these conversations. So I would just encourage you, like, have the difficult conversation because it's actually less stressful on the other side as long as you know somebody's wishes when something does happen. And in terms of the employer part, I would just encourage you. I saw there were some great recommendations about caregiver employee resource groups at work, finding kind of camaraderie with others going through similarly situated experiences can also help in terms of resources and just to have that sounding board with people who you're close with. So have the conversations with them as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So I want to answer one because someone said, give us top 3 ways you can start a plan. Number 1, if you have children or a spouse, tell them what you want. Let them know. No one knows what you're thinking. If you think, oh, my daughter will know what I'm thinking. Your daughter hasn't lived with you in 30 years. She has no idea what you're thinking. She doesn't know that you don't want to live in an assisted living. She doesn't know whether you want, if she's your medical power of attorney, she doesn't know the life-saving things you want or don't want. Have an honest conversation with your loved ones. Let them know what you want. Gather a plan. Start finding some resources. There are geriatric care managers, aging life care professionals. This is what they do. This is their stock and trade. They help people plan. They give people resources. They may not need them today, but gather them, put them in a folder because you may need them. So that would be the sort of second thing. And then the third one is be realistic about your finances because and make sure your kids or whomever is going to be the power of attorneys, make sure they know. Because in the end, a lot of this planning involves around how much money do you have in the bank versus how much you want to reserve for your family members after you're gone. The final thing is have documents done. You need to have a medical and a financial power of attorney so that somebody can step in on your behalf when you need it, right? And that they will know what you need. So if you don't have that, then all of a sudden, no one knows what needs to get done. Doctors don't know who to ask. Sometimes the state has to get involved. And in the end, people get appointed to make decisions for you that know nothing about you. Those would be the three things that I would say. Jen, I don't know if you have anything you want to add?
No, I think it definitely like the conversations, and I was going to recommend Aging Life Care Manager. I think the other thing, the one thing that I haven't said that is so important is just to really acknowledge for yourself and your loved ones, whatever you're feeling makes sense. Whatever you're feeling is valid. A lot of people get so caught up in feeling like, "Ugh, I know I shouldn't be resentful. I know I shouldn't feel frustrated. I know I should be focusing on the positive. I know I should be feeling grateful." That they really, a lot of energy goes to trying to redirect our feelings when we're trying to avoid feeling the way we think we shouldn't feel. But if we're instead taking a step back and being, of course I'm sad. Of course I feel guilty about not being able to be there for my mom and my daughter at the same time, having to miss something for one or the other. Of course that makes me feel guilty. Of course I'm upset that my mom can't do the things she used to do. Of course I'm feeling impatient, like just giving yourself permission. Or of course I'm sad about leaving the community that I've lived in for so long. And yes, I'm moving to this beautiful place. And there are things that I can look forward to and be excited about. But I'm also sad about not being in my familiar surroundings anymore. And that's okay. Whatever you're feeling makes sense. And really giving yourself permission to feel that is such an important part of this.
And one of the things, let me just say one more thing, Patricia, and then you can jump in. One of the things, we've talked a lot about kids and their parents, but let's not also forget that there are spouses involved that are living this exact same problem. And it's really hard, especially when you're living with someone with a cognitive impairment, because this is a person you have lived with for 30, 40, 50 years. And now you've become a parent to them again. And so one, that creates resentment. It creates a lot of hard work. It creates stress. And again, those folks, there are all sorts of organizations where people can talk with like-minded people that have the same problems so that they don't feel that they're alone. And support groups are out there and are very good. So keep in mind that oftentimes it's someone you're living with. You're in your 60s, and you don't know their spouse, but their spouse has early onset dementia, and they're really struggling with trying to manage continuing to work and earn a living, which they now have to work longer because their spouse had to give up her job or his job because of their impairment. So sorry, Patricia, you had something?
Actually, I was going to ask you to speak to that because I felt we haven't talked about one of the big elephants in the room, which is this early cognitive decline that we're seeing more and more, where families with spouses under 50 years old are having cognitive decline and how that affects a young family. You got kids in high school and your mom can't remember anything anymore. And it's debilitating for those children. But the spouse really, it's a whole different relationship than they signed up for. And I know to death do you part, but this is, wow, it's a really challenging time.
Well,
So I also wanted to mention that this wonderful program, you guys were amazing, such a dynamic trio here, has been recorded. And this is the kind of recording that you could share with a loved one and sit down and say, I saw this great program and I want to talk to you about it, and stop and start it with the different questions. It's a perfect catalyst. So I really appreciate you all being here and being such loving, kind people, because we need more of that in the planet. So I'll let you wrap up, Steve. We just have a couple minutes.
Great. Again, one final thing on this. Look, there's no right or wrong answer, especially if you are living with someone, and it's hard work to live with someone with dementia, right? Or with physical declines that you become the primary caregiver. Some people aren't cut out for it. And there's no shame in that. It's better to recognize that it's what you're not able to do and help set your loved one up in the right situation than try and fail. And then you have a breakdown because you've tried too hard and you didn't succeed. Look, on a final positive note, it's been great having Jillian and Jenn here, and Patricia, thank you, and Steve for helping put this together. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions out there because there were many, but a lot of great ideas and a lot of great suggestions. All of us are available if you have any additional questions or ideas. We're happy to help and talk. That's part of why we do this, is to help educate people. This is, to me, a mission on educating people to make sure they are getting the resources they need. There's a lot out there, but it's really confusing and hard to find the right resources. So thank you all for joining today. I turn it over to you, Steve.
Oh, this was
Got a final
amazing.
minute?
And I'm sure everybody loved not hearing my voice throughout the hour. This is great. I loved it. And it was really a nice experience for me to sit back, see all the engagement in the comments and what have you. I liked one of the comments that said that this should be a 5-part series. And I tend to agree. I think it's very difficult to get through all these scenarios in 1 hour, but also just bringing a community together around this topic and being together as a cohort for 5 weeks would be a great idea. So maybe that'll be something that
you know
we
what?
look forward to.
You're right, because look, in addition to here and consultants like Jillian and Jenn, there are daily money managers, there are move specialists. There's pretty much something for everyone in terms of finding what you need as an available resource. It's just hard to find them. But I would say one thing, geriatric care managers, aging and life care professionals, this is their job to help pull these kind of resources together. I encourage people to talk to them if they need be, and us as well. Thank you all for coming in today. And someone did miss you, Steve. I don't know who she is. It may be your daughter.
That was so
yeah.
sweet.
Yeah,
She
she
misses
changed
the
her
fact
last
that you
name.
didn't
That's
get to
great.
talk.
No. So anyways, this is great, y'all. And let's all have a great, safe weekend. And if you are in the Washington, D.C. area and you're rooting for the Commanders, let's hope that we get a victory this weekend. That would be really special for our region. We will talk to you all.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Bye.